Vitamin E, which is vitamin E, which takes care of free radicals, which cause damage to the body. Oddly enough, they have found that ibuprofen, taken regularly, will diminish the risk of Alzheimer's disease. It is an anti-inflammatory, so there is some possibility that it is doing something within the tissues of the brain to diminish any kind of small amount of swelling that might come into play there. And there is a botanical called ginkgo biloba, which seems to help as well with memory. Multiple sclerosis, that is an autoimmune disorder causing destruction of myelin sheaths. Now, sheaths become scarred or develop plaques, nerve signal is not able to send properly after that. Affects about 500,000 people in the United States. So 500,000 people out of 300 million plus. So we're looking at about 1/6 of 1%. It appears typically between the ages of 20 and 40. And it happens to females more often because females have a more active immune system than males. So this is one situation where there's a benefit to the Y chromosome. Females in general get autoimmune diseases much more frequently than males because their immune systems are about a third again as strong as males. 1.5 times as strong as males are. So symptoms will include muscular weakness, abdominal sensations, maybe double vision. And the double vision one is actually one of the first things that people experience when they have multiple sclerosis. Someone may at one time have been able to have several drinks of several beers or something like that before their vision blurs, and suddenly it only takes one. And then they start having double vision occur even when they're not drinking. Those types of things. Now this is a remitting and relapsing disease. That is, you will develop a problem. It will end up stopping there. Maybe you can compensate, maybe not, but it doesn't get any worse. And then it can come back depending on what comes into play here. It has been associated with a herpes simplex virus, herpes simplex number 8. And if you know anything about herpes, herpes is a disease that remits and relapses. So most people have oral herpes. About 96-97% of the population have that. And under the right circumstances, largely stress, you can end up having an outbreak. So with multiple sclerosis, you want to live a relatively stress-free life if possible, just to cut down on the likelihood of having an issue. It can also be progressive. This is very unfortunate for folks when it just continues. It does not remit, it does not relapse. And you end up with a cumulative loss of function. For these folks, this can progress fairly rapidly, and you can actually die from this as you lose the ability to control respiratory rate or the ability to control heart rate and other functions. Parkinson's disease. This is a degenerative disorder of the nervous system from the death of dopamine-containing cells. Now, dopamine, also, we have dopamine receptors which improve mood. And so someone who has Parkinson's disease and this progressive loss of these dopamine-containing cells may, would in fact get depressed. It is to be expected. Now, The most obvious symptoms that we see with Parkinson's disease have to be movement related. They'll get shaky. They may develop a rigidity of their tissues, particularly facial tissues that may just not express facial, may not have facial expressions that you would expect. Generally, slowness of movement and difficulty walking are seen with this as well. Aging in the nervous system. Now, between years 1 and 2, the brain grows rapidly. It's got an increase in size of neurons with the neuroglial myelination develops, and myelination is not completed obviously when you're born. If it's continuing up through 1 or 2 years old, and it's actually getting these tissues myelinated that starts to give some control over things like urination. Babies really can't control urination because the cells that go to the bladder that control that have not been properly myelinated. Now, early childhood until death, your brain rate declines as you get older. You are constantly losing brain cells, and by the time you're 80, you've lost about 6 or 7% of it. Now again, most of the time we're able to compensate for the loss of cells. We lose number of synaptic contacts and declines. Processing information slows down, conduction velocity decreases, voluntary movement slows down, and your reflexes slow down. And that's just general nervous system. But in terms of losing the brain cells, you're going to do that, but as I said, you compensate. So if you had an IQ of 120 when you are 20 years old, you'll probably have an IQ around 120 when you're 65. There is something called terminal drop. And what happens there is that in the 2 years prior to death, if you're going to die of natural causes, but about 2 years after your death, or before your death, your body stops being able to compensate for the damage. And you can't rewire parts of the brain to compensate for the damage anymore. And the end result is that about 2 years prior to death, you have a 20-point loss in IQ. So someone who had an IQ of 120 through most of their life might drop down to an IQ of 100, which is still well within the normal range, but still something to be aware of. Regeneration and repair. There is a certain amount of plasticity when you sprout new dendrites, and dendrites sprouting and connecting up to other nerves is part of what we see in gaining knowledge and memories and things like that. We synthesize new proteins, and we can change synaptic contacts with other neurons so we can click up and make neural networks. Now there is a limited ability for regeneration and repair. In the peripheral nervous system, if the myelin sheath remains intact, it'll act as a guide for the axon to regrow through, and you can regain sensation or motor movement. Yeah, but the maximum amount you're going to get is about 6 inches over 6 months. And it progressively slows. So you might get 3 inches of repair the first month, 1.5 inches in the second month, 3/4 of an inch in the third month, less than 1/2 inch in the fourth month, and so forth. End result is that you get about 6 months of 6 inches of healing that can occur in the peripheral nervous system. Saw this, periodically. You can take a tooth out and you can end up compressing a nerve with the process, and the person may have a numbness of the lip that eventually goes away. In the central nervous system, there's really no repairs possible. The myelin sheath, which is made by the oligodendrocytes, is not nearly as tightly bound or tightly wound, and as a result, it collapses if there is damage to an axon and prevents regrowth from occurring. So here's an example. We've got an injury site. We've got the Schwann cells that are remaining there. Neuron remains intact. And if there's no rapid formation of scar tissue, we can get some repair along the way. That is essentially all we have. So hopefully you find this helpful.